So I'm going to talk about the ICH-E7 guideline, and I will try to give you an overview of this overarching guideline. And I think we will hear more about drugs or disease-specific guidelines in other presentations. So just for you who are not totally familiar with the ICH stands for the International Conference of Harmonization of Technical Requirements for Registration of Pharmaceuticals for Human Use. Anyway, this is an organization that consists of 6 parties from Japan, US, and EU, both industry and regulatory agencies, and nowadays also participants from other parts of the world. And the aim is to try to come up with guidelines so that registration of products can be more harmonized on a global level. So the guideline we are talking about here is called ICH-E7, Studies in Support of Special Populations, Geriatrics. As you can see, this was adopted already in 1994. So a couple of years ago, the ICH felt that there was a need to update this guideline, and it was decided not to change the whole guideline, but instead to issue a question and answer document. And the reason for doing so was that it was felt that the importance of geriatric data had increased because the geriatric population is increasing in size. And there has also been recent advances in pharmacokinetics and dynamics since the guideline was issued in '94. So this was the basis for this decision. And some of the issues that we were told that we should focus on in this group, we had a group then who drafted this question and answer document, was the number and the age distribution that would be expected in a development program, how to plan this development program, to describe specific elements that should be taken into account, for instance, comorbidities and concomitant therapies, specific endpoints, PK and PD, and also what could possibly be addressed post-authorization. So this was what we had when we started working with this question and answer document. And I will take you through it, each question. There are 6 questions and answers, and I will try to give you some reflections on how this could be translated into practice, what has been done, and what could be done in the future. So the first question is, why do we need an adequate representation of geriatric patients in the clinical database? And this sort of sets the scene for this document. We say that there are age-related physiological changes that can affect PK and PD, and that geriatric patients may be more prone to adverse effects, and that all these things cannot be predicted from non-geriatric populations. So this is the basis for why we need guidance for geriatric patients. I think when you look at geriatric patients, you could ask yourself whether all geriatric patients really constitute a kind of a special population. And I think maybe you have to divide them into subpopulations. Here I've divided older people into 3 subpopulations. You could have a group who are healthy, that is apart from the condition that's being treated. And there, I think efficacy and safety data can be extrapolated from younger patients. Then you have those elderly which have age-related differences, but where the differences are covered by PK studies, which are always included in the marketing approval, like renal hepatic impairment, drug interactions, and so on. And for these patients, I think we usually would like to have some clinical data for confirmation of these results, but we can just to a large degree rely on data from these PK studies. But then we have the group which I think we will talk most about during this workshop, and that is patients with comorbidities and comodications, and we can call them frail, even though I don't think there's a really good definition of that yet. In this group, it would be much more difficult to extrapolate, because here we have unknown factors that may affect both PK and PD, efficacy and safety. Here we would need standalone data. How to do this can be discussed, and I'm sure it will be discussed further. The guideline is not very specific. It says that it may be good to have them in the same trial so that you can compare with the younger patients. But I think in some cases it may also be adequate to have a separate study. The next question in this document concerns how many patients, the number of patients that should be included. Here we say that the population, the geriatric population, should be representative of the target patient population, and that this would usually be, it would usually be appropriate to include more than 100 patients. But the most important thing is that the elderly patients should be included all over this entire age spectrum. And the aim is to show consistency of the treatment effect and safety profile in these patients compared to non-geriatric patients. In the original guideline, it said that a minimum of 100 patients would usually allow detection of clinically important differences. And when we drafted this question and answer, we thought a lot about this, discussed a lot if we should try to find another cutoff, another number of patients. But we found in the end that any number we would come up with would indeed be arbitrary. So we decided instead to focus on that the population should reflect the target population. So it will depend on the drug, it will depend on the disease. We think, though, that it's very important to include patients over 75, and 75 as such is not important. I think the thing is that the higher up you come in age, age becomes a surrogacy for frailty, and I think that's what's important. I think one problem with this question and answer, this number 2, is that you could really ask yourself how many patients are needed to show consistency of the treatment effect and safety profile. Because if you include too low number, of course the confidence interval will be too wide and the point estimate will be unreliable. So I think here you have to go on case by case. It will depend on the mechanism, it will depend on the target population, and as has been said by Francesca here, we do recommend scientific advice in these cases. Here is just one thing that has been included that Francesca told back. We've included these tables in the assessment report to get a better view of how many patients are included. So the third question concerns if there are any characteristics that are particularly important to address in the planning of the clinical program. And here we say, talk about comorbidities and concomitant therapies. And in this third question, we just say that inclusion-exclusion criteria should allow the participation of these patients. And I think the fourth question refers to a lot the same thing. We say that an appropriate representation of geriatric population, including patients with concomitant therapies and comorbidities, is expected in the marketing application, and that every effort should be made to include these patients in the development program. However, we also say that in some cases it may be challenging, so it could be included post-marketing. But in that case, you should have a specific plan how you will do this post-marketing. And we also say that available data will be reflected in the product labeling. So I think this is a very difficult question. It's a key question, whether you can include frail patients pre or post-marketing, and I'm sure we will discuss this more today and tomorrow. We say that data is expected at the time of approval, could possibly be acceptable post-marketing, but then you need a specific plan. I cannot say that we have really implemented this yet, but I'm sure we will implement this as conditions in the RMP and Annex 2. Also here, I think it's important to have scientific advice, use that opportunity concerning the need to include frail patients pre or post-marketing. And we have also asked our geriatric expert group about frailty evaluation tools, so we can give you some input on that. What we have done more and more is to reflect in the product information how much data there are in patients over 75, and we will continue to do so. Fifth question concerns specific adverse events and age-related efficacy endpoints, and we do encourage this. It will, however, be dependent on the characteristics of disease and the mechanism of action. And I think also here we can have input from my geriatric expert group, and I think we will hear more about this age-specific endpoints in other presentations further on. The last question concern PK and drug-drug interactions. What we say here, not to read everything, is that you could use population PK provided that you have sufficient number of patients in different age ranges, but you could also have a specific pharmacokinetic study comparing non-geriatric and geriatric subjects. The purpose, of course, of having a separate PK study is to look at the influence of unknowns, so that's not covered by other studies in patients with renal impairment or hepatic impairment. So therefore, I think it's essential to include the very elderly in these PK studies or in the population PK approach. We decided not to elaborate more in this on PK studies in this question and answer document, because we felt that there are indeed other relevant guidelines that are also applicable to elderly patients. So just to conclude the question and answer series 7 document, when it comes to number of patients, we say that more than 100 patients may be needed, but the most important thing is that the number should reflect the target population. Also very important and new from the old guideline, I think, is that data should be presented for the entire age spectrum, and it's very important to include very old people, because this is, as I see it, a surrogate for frailty. And every effort should be made to include these patients pre-marketing, but if you, for some reason, have to do with post-marketing, you should have a specific plan for this. You should look at specific adverse events depending on the disease in question, and you could use population PK or a specific PK study. So I think that sort of concludes my speech, and these are the main messages from that guideline. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristina. Any question? Yes, to Kristina. Yes, don't forget to introduce yourself.
Yes. Florian von Resong, Novartis. Kristina, I have a question about the Q&A document ICH you just summarized. What is the level of guidance? Because in the, as you know, the FDA has published 2 months ago more or less the same document as a guidance for industry, so they have it officially published now. The question is, what is the level of commitment or binding for Europe? The European, we have this ICH document on the, as you have summarized it, how binding is it for Europe as compared to the US, where it seems to be the guidance looks more strong or more directing into this, the content of the Q&A document? I don't know if my question is clear. Is there any difference in terms of...
Yeah, I understand the question. I'm not sure I can give you a reason. I mean, it should be the same document, but the document has been approved by, it's been sort of approved by Japan, FDA, Europe. The legal, I don't know really if it's different from, if someone can help me out there. The legal, because we have different systems, haven't we, in US and EU, so.
Just to understand if there are different level of engagement across the 3 ICH regions, because we mentioned development is a worldwide exercise. Is it something we should consider? Or?
Florian, I mean, the document, as every guideline, is, of course, you can disregard it if you want, but it's not very wise to do so, especially for an ICH guideline that is approved for across the 3 main regions. So I think that the level of commitment is rather solid for this guideline.
Yes, André Elfering from the MEV in the Netherlands.
The purpose of a clinical development plan is to show efficacy and safety for a product whose efficacy and safety is not known. How can you ask for every effort already to include patients with comorbidity and concomitant therapies when you're not sure about the efficacy and safety of the product in the general population? I think I see some ethical problems for the ethical committees.
Well, I think it may be a question for ethical committees, but wouldn't that depend a lot on what the drug is and what the disease is? If it's a disease where you have a lot of older people, it wouldn't make sense to assess it in younger people first and then in older people afterwards. I'm not sure I understand the... the problem.
André, I'm not absolutely sure that you could say that when you include geriatric patients with concomitant therapy and comorbidities, you don't know anything about the efficacy and safety of the medicine. You know, and for ethical reason, I would reverse the question. I think it's probably better to include this type of patients if at the end of the day, this type of patient will take the medicine. So I could agree part of your comment, but certainly not all. Yes? Sorry, I don't see you.
I think that the real question is that if I read the main messages, and the main message is to make every effort to include geriatric patients with concomitant therapies and comorbidities in the pre-marketing clinical development program, that's very fine. But if we do that, we have no methodology at all to measure efficacy in these patients. So the issue from this conference and wherever is to find out if we can develop a proper methodology. Otherwise, these are words, but magic words and nothing else. And second, it's my personal curiosity. Who invented that we have to include 100 geriatric patients? Please tell me.
No, I think that was in the original guideline from 94.
Fantastic.
Pardon?
Magic number. It's
Magic number.
fantastic.
Yeah. I cannot give you an answer to that. It was arbitrary, of course.
Okay, the last one. Yes?
Paul Janssen from the Netherlands. You talk us about the translation in practice of the E7 guideline. My question is, do you think that the information that is gathered is easy available for prescribers and patients?
What we have done so far is to try to include more and more data in the product information to make doctors aware of, has this drug been tested in elderly patients or not? Because that was one of the questions from Barbara earlier. Has this drug been tested in all the patients? We try to include more and more information in the product information and in the EPAR, but I think there we can be better.
There's no special section for it in the SPC. Should it be there? Because I think it is for prescribers, it's very hard to find the available information.
Yeah, I think there is a special session in what we call regulatory score 4.2, where we talk about the dosing section. There we have it now, but it maybe can be better, but that's how we do it right now.